September 23rd, 1978. The California Angels are playing the Chicago White Sox at the now-defunct Comiskey Park. Lyman Bostock of the Angels goes 2 for 4, raising his average to .296 on the season. The fact that his average is that high is somewhat of a miracle, considering he started the season going 2 for 39 and was sitting at a .147 average at the end of April and a .209 average at the end of May. He had just signed one of the largest contracts in baseball coming into this season, and his slow start was frustrating both to the team and himself. He donated his entire April salary to charity, stating, "I'm not that type of person to take money, and I know I'm not doing well. If I can't perform to my capability, then I don't think I deserve the money." But since the beginning of June, Lyman has been earning his paycheck, hitting .331. But his good performance on this day is bittersweet as the Angels end up losing 5-4. And now sitting 6 games behind the division-leading Royals, with only 7 games left on the year, their playoff hopes are all but gone. But shortly, none of that would matter. Just 9 hours after the game ended, Lyman Bostock would be dead. Twins center fielder Lyman Bostock had a problem with Twins owner Calvin Griffith, and he wasn't shy about it. "I didn't want to play for Calvin Griffith anymore. He's not reasonable, he doesn't care about his players, and he doesn't pay them like modern ball players. 11 guys left the team this year. That's evidence somebody is doing something wrong." I need to delve into Calvin Griffith as an owner to give you some context into why Bostock might have felt this way. If I were to tell you to picture a stereotypical fat cat baseball owner in the 60s and 70s that put profit over fan experience, had very public clashes with personnel and players in his organization, constantly put his foot in his mouth with crass public quotes, and wasn't liked by a lot of people, Calvin Griffith might be the guy that comes to mind. He became majority owner of the Washington Senators in 1955. The team was struggling both on the field and financially throughout the 50s, and rumors started swirling about the team relocating. Griffith attempted to put fans at ease with a declaration in the Washington Post. "I have lived in Washington, D.C. for about 35 years. I attended school here and established many roots here. The city has been good to my family and me. This is my home. I intend that it shall remain my home for the rest of my life. As long as I have any say in the matter, and I expect that I shall for a long, long time, the Washington Senators will stay here too. Next year, the year after that, forever." He moved the team to Minnesota 2 years later, backpedaling on his comments, saying he meant he would only keep the team in Washington if it was financially viable.
I don't think the Griffith family could have stayed in business. We had to have extra revenue, and that was it.
Calvin Griffith also took part in a time-honored baseball tradition of getting into a public spat with manager Billy Martin and then firing him. This was days after Martin's first season as the manager, where the Twins won 97 games and made the ALCS. Don Riley wrote in the St. Paul Pioneer Press the day before the firing, "Griffith may not be popular with the masses, but I don't believe he's stupid. If he didn't rehire Martin, he leaves himself open to the biggest fan revolt since Gopher fans learned there are football fields where you can see the game for $5. And in Riley's column the day after the firing, Griffith couldn't have done a more dastardly work of unpopularity if he turned down a reprieve for Joan of Arc, or got caught drilling holes in Washington's rowboat. There was even a play in Minneapolis called Calvinisms, giving a fictional account of Griffith ranting to himself the night before he had to sell the Twins in 1984.
Billy Martin, I never fired him. Fired himself. Billy Martin said he didn't want to manage, so I said fine. Phew, you would have thought I'd fired Hubert Humphrey. People got all riled up. They hung me in apathy, and this was about a guy who'd beat up Dave Boswell, one of his own pitchers. He'll get himself fired again.
He was also known to be very frugal, especially when it came to contract negotiations.
It was interesting to try to negotiate with Calvin, and I almost think it was a game with him when he was trying to negotiate contracts, because I remember one year we were within $500 of signing my contract, and he wouldn't budge. And finally, I said, Calvin, if that $500 means that much to you, let's sign the contract. So we did, and I think he won. He felt like he won.
Yeah. There's a few other things he did and said that got him in hot water with the public, but we'll come back to that. We wanted to set the scene for why some people didn't really get along with Calvin Griffith. For now, let's return to Bostock's comments. What did he mean about 11 guys leaving the team? Under modern MLB rules, players can't just decide to leave the team they're on if they're disgruntled with the owner. There's a very specific timeline on a player's career when they can declare for free agency. If a team had 11 guys leaving free agency one year, it'd be more down to a player's timelines aligning and nothing to do with them being disgruntled. That's been true for much of the history of free agency in Major League Baseball, except for this very specific period of time. The Peters Site's arbitration decision on Messersmith and McNally at the end of 1975 had rendered the reserve clause useless and ushered in a new era of free agency in baseball. The decision established that a player could refuse to sign their annual contract, play out the season, and then they would be a free agent at the end of the year, referred to at the time as a player playing out his option. In essence, a player could force free agency at any point in their career by just playing without a contract for 1 year. As you can imagine, the league and the owners had massive issues with the player being able to force free agency at any time, even if they'd only been in the league for as little as 2 years, and quickly agreed with the Players Association to establish 6 years of team control before a player was eligible for free agency, which would take effect in 1978. But that left 1976 and 1977 as the 2 years where a player could still force their free agency by playing out their option. Many players used the threat of doing this to leverage a long-term extension with their team. Mike Schmidt and Bob Boone with the Phillies, Steve Stone with the White Sox, Chris Chambliss and Mickey Rivers with the Yankees, John Matlack with the Mets, Rick Burleson and Cecil Cooper with the Red Sox, Bill Madlock with the Giants, Dennis Leonard and Freddie Patek with the Royals, Dave Winfield with the Padres, Frank Tanana with the Angels, John Montefusco with the Giants, Nolan Ryan with the Angels, Don Sutton with the Dodgers. Every one of these players signed multi-year extensions with their team, something that didn't ever happen prior to 1975. Originally, that was what Bostock wanted to do. He wanted a $200,000 a year contract for 4 years from the Twins. He had a breakout in 1976. At the age of just 25, he finished 8th in Major League Baseball in batting average, hitting .323, and was one of the game's most promising young stars. Considering free agent contracts at the time, his extension request was a reasonable amount, if not considerably low for someone of Bostock's caliber. Adjusting for baseball revenues and rising salaries, it would be similar to an $8 million a year contract today. In other words, similar to Ozzie Albies' contract, which is widely considered one of the biggest underpays in the game. But Bostock wasn't the only one on the Twins trying to get a long-term deal. Entering spring training of 1977, the Twins had signed just 15 of their 37 players to contracts for that season, more unsigned players than any other team, and by a wide margin. Calvin Griffith had a conundrum. With so many players unsigned and threatening free agency, and the Twins without the resources and revenue of teams like the Yankees, who were just gobbling up free agents left and right with monstrous contracts for Catfish Hunter, Reggie Jackson, and Don Gullett, Griffith had to pick and choose who he could keep past 1977, who he could negotiate down to a smaller contract, and who was a lost cause that the team wouldn't sign and would either trade or let go to free agency. Griffith's first big win was locking down Rod Carew to a 3-year deal in 1976, paying him just $180,000 a year. Signing the future Hall of Famer and star of the Twins would pay off immediately, with Carew flirting with a .400 batting average in 1977, finishing the year at .388, winning both a batting title and MVP. But even that would be short-lived, because at the end of 1978, Calvin Griffith gave a speech at the Waseca Lions Club where for 40 minutes thinking he was off the record, he went off on any and every player on the Twins, including saying Carew was a damn fool for agreeing to his contract, which was well below his value. He also said his reasons for moving the team to Minnesota back in 1961. I tell you why we came to Minnesota. It was when we found out you only had 15,000 blacks here. Black people don't go to ball games, but they'll fill up a wrestling ring and put up such a chant it'll scare you to death. We came here because you've got good, hard-working white people here. After those comments, Carew vowed he wouldn't play for Griffith anymore and demanded he be traded. 4 months later, he was sent to the California Angels. In 2020, during the George Floyd protests in Minneapolis, the Twins decided to remove Griffith's statue in front of Target Field due to those comments. Carew said of that decision, "I understand and respect the Minnesota Twins' decision to remove the Calvin Griffith statue outside Target Field. While I've always supported the Twins' decision to honor Calvin with a statue, I also remember how inappropriate and hurtful his comments were on that fateful day in Waseca. The Twins did what they felt they needed to do for the organization and for our community. While we cannot change history, perhaps we can learn from it." When it came to Lyman Bostock, Griffith's tactics also didn't go over too well. Bostock made $25,000 salary in 1976. If any player had the season Bostock had, they would expect to see a pay raise the next year. With Bostock unsigned, Griffith set his 1977 salary at $20,000, a 20% pay cut, which was the maximum allowable pay cut in the CBA at the time. Lyman Bostock had hit .323 in 1976, and in 1977 he would make just $1,000 over the league minimum. The Twins tried to trade Bostock, but trade talks fell through, and Griffith eventually capitulated and offered Bostock a 6-year contract for more than $2 million total, which was well more than what Bostock initially wanted, and well in line with what other players were getting at the time. But Lyman was sick with the whole negotiating process with the Twins, and sick of Calvin Griffith, how he had been lowballed in the past, and how the Twins docked his 1977 salary, and he turned the lucrative offer down. Bostock said of this offer, "That was way more than enough money. If they had offered me that at the beginning of the season, I'd have signed. But by the end, I just didn't want to stay there." Bostock, along with many other players at that time, was also getting on board with Marvin Miller's crusade to create solidarity among the players with the players' union and against the owners, who had gotten away with mistreating and underpaying players for too long. He specifically talked about Curt Flood when discussing why he turned down the Twins' offer. "I'd be defeating the purpose of what Curt Flood has done for the players." Another major star that was looking to leave the Twins in free agency after 1977 was another Twins outfielder and the eventual AL RBI leader that year, Larry Heisel. Heisel and Bostock were best friends, living in the same condominium complex in Minneapolis. One of Bostock's main regrets regarding free agency is he and Heisel would no longer be on the same team. "I'll miss Larry Heisel, who was my main man. We were in each other's shadow." In all, the Twins lost 10 players to free agency after 1977. The second highest team in the league was the Yankees with 5. Today, free agents can negotiate with any team, but from 1976 to 1980, they had what was called the re-entry draft, which was a system put in place to prevent one team from signing all the free agents, which was a real fear at the time since the impact on the league that free agency would bring was an unknown. I gotta spend some time explaining the re-entry draft because it's kinda weird. How it works. You have every single player that declared for free agency in a pool, and a draft order set in reverse order from the previous year's standings. In 1978, the Toronto Blue Jays had the first pick due to their dreadful 59 and 102 record the year before. With the first pick in the re-entry draft, they took Lyman Bostock. So does that mean Bostock is now a Blue Jay? No. Bostock was taken 12 more times in the draft. Each team could pick as many players as they wanted, and each player could be drafted up to 13 times. A player could negotiate only with the teams that drafted them. Each team could sign a maximum of 2 free agents, or as many free agents equal to the number of players they lost to free agency that year, whichever was higher. Any player that wasn't drafted by at least 3 teams was free to negotiate with anyone. It's a confusing system that was scrapped after 1980 because owners and players didn't like it. To show how little people cared about the system, the Cincinnati Reds refused to draft anyone out of principle of being against free agency. Mike Torres was drafted 14 times in 1978, even though the limit was 13, and nobody noticed. And the last 19 rounds of the 1978 re-entry draft was just the Rangers and White Sox alternating picks, mostly on players that weren't drafted 3 times, meaning they could sign with any team regardless, and the picks meant nothing. So the Rangers and White Sox were just wasting everyone's time. In the end, what happened in that draft meant that Bostock could negotiate with the 13 teams that picked him. The Blue Jays, A's, Mets, Padres, Brewers, Giants, Angels, White Sox, Rangers, Pirates, Orioles, Yankees, and Royals. Bostock, still bitter over Twins ownership, stated, "It's not so much money that I am concerned about, it is finding somewhere I feel that I am going to be happy, where Lyman Bostock can be Lyman Bostock." Even if Bostock said money wasn't a concern, it still did eliminate a number of teams early in negotiations. The Pirates and Royals were out, with Bostock's agent Abdul Jalil Al-Hakim saying, "You can't ask a player to consider signing for $1 million less with one club than he can get from another." Right now we have 5 offers of over $2 million and 3 offers that are better than what Reggie Jackson signed for. As the bidding kept going up and teams kept dropping out, there emerged 2 frontrunners for Bostock's services, the Angels and the Yankees. The Yankees, led by George Steinbrenner, clearly had the largest pocketbook and by all reports offered Bostock the most money, as well as a chance to play for a team that had just won the World Series. The Angels, owned by actor Gene Autry and run by general manager Buzzy Bavasi, offered Bostock home. He had grown up in Southern California and was very close to his mother and extended family that lived there. And when he visited Anaheim to meet with Autry and Bavasi, they treated him like royalty. The Angels showed me more respect in the few hours I spent at the stadium than in all 6 years I spent in Minnesota. When I met Mr. Autry, he approached me and introduced himself. Buzzy asked if the team could do anything for my wife, who was in the hospital. When I was in the hospital in Minnesota with a broken ankle, nobody from the front office visited me. 2 years ago, Calvin Griffith said he hadn't been in the clubhouse in 20 years. Now what in the hell is that? You have to talk to people. Find out why the operation is not working. I was there 6 years and everything was just helter-skelter, almost like they condition you to be unhappy. In the end, Bostock decided to sign with the Angels. New York wanted me as a player, California wanted me as a player and a person.
I think the people here appreciate me a lot more because I'm from the area and I hope I can please the people here.
Al-Hakim said of his client, "If you knew what we gave up by not signing with the Yankees, ooh-wee. What we gave up, someone else would have been happy to sign for. But that's Lyman. He wanted to play here. Besides, you get to a certain point in the bargaining, money doesn't mean anything. You have enough." All of the news reports at the time of Bostock's signing reported the contract as a 6-year, $3 million deal, which would have made it the largest deal in baseball history up to that point, just edging out Reggie Jackson's $2.9 million. But, as I found out in a lot of research, reporting on contracts back in those days wasn't too great. $3 million was the number that Bostock's agent was saying, but the Angels confirmed it was $2.25 million. And as far as Reggie Jackson is concerned, you can find sources listing his contract as low as $2.7 million or as high as $4 million. Even more confusing, Bostock's best friend on the Twins, Larry Heisel, signed a contract for $3.155 million with the Brewers 5 days before Bostock, but Bostock's supposed $3 million contract was still proclaimed as the largest in the majors. To be fair, the financials of Heisel's deal weren't announced at the time of signing, and it did have over 30% of the contract in deferred money and 20% as a signing bonus, which, as we all know from recent MLB contracts, messes up the calculations a bit as far as what the contract is actually worth. Rest assured, Bostock did not have the largest contract in baseball history, but he was still one of the game's highest paid players going into 1978. And with that came expectations, and with expectations came pressure. Bostock started his 1978 season with the Angels miserably, going 0-3 his first game, 0-4 his second game, and 0-4 his third game. The player expected to compete for a batting title when he signed his massive contract wouldn't get his first hit with his new team until his 15th at-bat. And it would get even worse after that. He would only get one more hit over his next 24 at-bats, bringing his total to 2 for 39, good for a .051 batting average his first 10 games as an Angel. Detroit Tiger Alan Trammell said of Bostock in his contract, "He hit .330 the year before the Angels signed him as a free agent, and because he got $1 million, everybody thought he should hit .380 or something." You could see he was really pressing when he got off to a bad start. He was saying to himself, "What can I do? What am I doing wrong?" I think a lot of guys got the big money and it put too much pressure on them. Lyman was not having a good time. I'd drive to the ballpark about 4 p.m. and just sit in my car. I didn't want to come to the clubhouse. I figured it would just be another bad day. I didn't know if I'd ever come out of it. I regretted having the money, having come to the Angels. I wanted to give it all back and call it even. Surprisingly, Bostock tried to do just that. I'm going to ask Mr. Autry not to pay me for the month. I feel I'm receiving money and I should produce. I want to give him his money's worth. If he won't keep the money, I'll ask him to give it to some kind of organization that can use the money. When Bostock went into Bavasi's office and officially requested not to get paid in April, Bavasi turned him down, saying they couldn't do that. He phrased it as if he was doing Bostock a solid. "I won't let you do that. What if you hit 600 next month? You're sure as hell not getting any more money out of me." But legally, you have to pay someone under contract for services rendered. It would be a bigger headache if the Angels tried to not pay him. It reminds me of a Rickey Henderson story where he signed his first big contract with the Athletics, a contract that included a $1 million signing bonus. Months after Henderson was issued the check, the Athletics accounting department reached out to him because he hadn't cashed it yet. Henderson had framed the check and put it on his wall. The accounting department had him go to the bank, cash the check, make a copy, and frame that as him not cashing the check would cause a number of accounting issues. A team having an outstanding positive balance on their books is just as bad for their accounting as accidentally overpaying a player, and why Autry and Bavasi couldn't fulfill Bostock's request to not get paid in April. But Bostock was still determined to make amends with Angels fans for his performance, and decided to donate his April salary instead. I'm investigating the causes now. I might donate $5,000 here and there to polio and sickle cell anemia and things like that, to people who have been affected by disease. Once people found out Bostock was looking for somewhere to give his money, letters came in from all over the country soliciting Bostock for donations. One guy wrote and said he lost his business and is about to lose his family because of it and needs $20,000. He's got the wrong idea. I'm talking about charities, not just giving it away to individuals. On May 4th, Lyman announced he made his final decision regarding which charities would receive the $40,000 he was donating. He decided to keep it all private, stating, "The entire matter is now closed. For the remainder of the season, my only concern will be to help the Angels win games." And that's exactly what he did. Giving the money away seemed to put him at ease, as the 5 games after May 4th, Lyman went 10 for 19, a .526 batting average. But the beginning of June is when he really went into the stratosphere, having 9 multi-hit games in the first 11 games of the month, going 24 for 49 in that span, a .490 average, and ended up hitting over 400 for the month, leading the league and raising his average all the way from that pathetic .051 to start the season to .287 on July 1st. Things seemed to have turned around for Lyman Bostock, and he was back to being one of the best hitters in the league.
Leonard Smith.
Leonard Smith. I hate to hear that name called.
Leonard Smith was an angry man. Living in the struggling city of Gary, Indiana, his story was a common one. Gary was a city built on steel. After World War II, it saw significant growth, and people moved to the city in droves looking for stable employment among the steel mills. The city's population had gone from 111,000 in 1940 to 180,000 in 1960. But the good times were coming to an end as the steel mills started laying off people and the town started to shrink. Having worked in the Gary steel mills most of his life, Leonard Smith was one of those that lost his job. Now unemployed, with his marriage falling apart, his life was heading in the wrong direction. Smith was arrested 7 times over a 15-year period, getting charged for second-degree burglary in 1967. He was also abusive to his wife. He pulled a gun on her in August of 1978 and struck her in the face a week later when she arrived home too late. She filed a restraining order and for divorce in mid-September, moving in with her sister. But Smith was undeterred. He would spend his days following and stalking his wife, as well as his 2 young daughters, even approaching one of his daughters on the street saying, "It won't be long before you'll be living with me." He was a powder keg, stewing in bitterness over his soon-to-be ex-wife, and most of all, angry. Lyman had just wrapped up his 2-for-4 day against the White Sox. While not happy about the result of the game, he was looking forward to visiting his extended family in Gary that evening. He had spent part of his childhood in Gary until his mother moved the 2 of them to Southern California, but he still had plenty of family in the area. It had become a bit of a tradition for him to take some of his teammates to spend time with his family while on road trips in Chicago. But this afternoon, after a loss, and with a day game the next day, nobody took him up on the offer to head out to Gary.
And he invited me to his place in Gary. He wanted me to meet his family and come to dinner that night. And, I was just a rookie, and I really didn't want, I just wanted to get my rest and finish the season. So I turned him down or whatever.
Even without his teammates, Lyman was still going to visit his family. And his uncle, Tom Turner, picked him up at the stadium. The plan was to briefly visit a cousin in Chicago, head to Gary for a family meal, and get up early Sunday to return to Chicago for the game. Lyman said of these visits to Gary, "Gary is like a second home. I have relatives and friends there who always come out to the ballpark to encourage me. I'm able to get good, home-cooked meals. It makes coming to Chicago a pleasure." Following the family dinner, Lyman started reminiscing with his relatives about acquaintances in Gary he hadn't seen in years. He asked Tom, "Whatever happened to Joan Hawkins, that girl I used to read to? I'd sure like to see how she's doing." "She lives right across town. I'll take you to see her now." His Uncle Edward exclaimed to Lyman, "You can't stay out all night and play ball." Lyman's response was, "I'll be right back." So Tom and Lyman made the short drive to Joan Hawkins' house, where they also met her sister Barbara. After they caught up, the sisters asked if they could get a ride across town to their cousin's house. It was a short drive through downtown Gary, so the 2 men were glad to drop them off. As Lyman, Tom, Joan, and Barbara made their way out to the car, Leonard Smith was sitting nearby in his Ford. He saw his wife, Barbara Smith, walking to a car with a man he didn't recognize, a man that looked well-dressed and athletic. He was already angry at his wife for the restraining order and wanting divorce, had suspected her of cheating, and this was pushing him over the edge. Tom took the driver's seat, Joan sat passenger, Barbara and Lyman filed into the back of the car with Lyman on the passenger side. At 10:44 p.m., they were driving down 5th Street in downtown Gary when they came to a red light at 5th and Jackson. Leonard Smith pulled alongside their car, rolled down his driver's side window, pulled out a small gauge shotgun, pointed it towards the back seat of Tom's Buick, fired 1 shot, and sped off. Barbara saw her husband take the shot, and her immediate reaction was to yell, "Tom, I seen him. Go get him. That's my stupid old husband." But then Barbara looked to her right at Lyman and said, "Tom, your nephew has been shot." The brunt of the shotgun blast had hit Lyman Bostock in the temple. He was rushed to St. Mary's Mercy Hospital, which was only 3 blocks away. Lyman was alive when they arrived at the hospital, but he was unresponsive, and it was quickly determined there was nothing the doctors could do.
That night, Rance Molinix and I were rooming together at the hotel, and Kenny Landreau and Danny Goodwin came in. We had just turned off our TV, just ready to fall asleep. I think our eyes had just closed, and we heard those guys walking in. They were in the room right next to us. They said something about, we just heard them say something about they don't think he's going to make it, but we didn't pay any attention because we didn't know what was going on. And probably about 30 seconds later, our phone rang, and it was Rance Molinix's wife in Southern California saying that Lyman had been shot, and they didn't think he was going to make it.
At around 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 hours after the shooting, Lyman Bostock was pronounced dead. He was 27 years old. His murderer was a man he'd never met, jealous over a woman he'd only known for 20 minutes. The newspapers declared he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. His Angels teammates heard of the shooting pretty quickly and spent much of the night waiting on updates from the hospital, eventually getting the news of his death in the late hours of the night. While they were still in grief, most getting little sleep, the team made the decision to play that day. Don Baylor said, "We had just lost a teammate, but damn it, we still had to play a ball game, so off we went." Angels manager Jim Fregosi canceled batting practice, scheduled a prayer service, and answered some questions to the press.
As a manager of a ball club, you lose a player, but as a man, you lose a friend.
Cared about this team, and I liked them.
But after reporters kept trying to get photos of Bostock's empty locker, the press was eventually kicked out.
So lo and behold, we get to the park the next day, and Fregosi hits me third. And I just immediately think, how am I going to do this? I can't replace this guy. This is Lyman Bostock. Are you kidding me? And I believe it was like Francisco Barrio. I think he was pitching that day. And my first time up, for whatever reason, God bless me, and I hit a home run. And I just remember trotting to first base and kind of just pointing to the sky. It's like, that's for you, Lyman. And I just kind of broke down. I mean, I couldn't deal with that whole thing.
But one player made the decision to sit out that day, and it wasn't an angel. Larry Heisel, Bostock's teammate in Minnesota who signed with the Brewers, was set to take the field in Milwaukee. It ended up being too much for him, and he asked the club if he could sit out. How could such a thing happen? I don't know what to say. He was the best friend I had in this game. Across the league, teams held moments of silence before each game. 4 days later, Bostock's funeral service was attended by an estimated 800 to 1,000 people. 7 hours after the shooting, Leonard Smith was arrested in his Gary, Indiana home. As he was booked into the police station, he was reported as repeatedly saying, "It's all about that bitch." Smith faced up to 60 years in prison for the murder.
This should have been an open and shut case. That's what it should have been, and that's how we as prosecutors looked at it.
Smith's attorney, Nick Theros, said, "It's not a defense of whodunit. As we know, everybody knew that Leonard did it. The only option I recognized at the time was to file a defense of insanity." During the trial, Theros made the entire case about how Barbara Smith had driven Leonard to insanity. She ultimately destroyed this man and his ability to conform to the law. Barbara Smith played with Leonard Smith like a yo-yo. Barbara Smith is responsible for this entire incident. She put Leonard Smith in the state of mind he was in. Leonard testified that in his mind he suspected Lyman Bostock, who he'd never met, was having an affair with his wife, and that Barbara previously dating other men made him jealous and despondent over the welfare of my daughters. He further testified he was attempting to reconcile with his wife, and after he saw her get into the car, he didn't remember anything he did. While two court-appointed psychiatrists testified that Smith was of sound mind and not insane, the defense's medical expert said Leonard was a schizophrenic who was incapable of controlling or understanding his actions that night. After a short deliberation, the jury's verdict was Leonard Smith was not guilty by reason of insanity. Smith was committed to the Logansport Saint Hospital for 6 months, but after the hospital staff determined he wasn't insane, they legally had to let him go free.
We did not find Mr. Smith mentally ill, and by law, we may not keep as a patient someone who is not mentally ill.
Leonard Smith had murdered Lyman Bostock in cold blood and spent 6 months in a hospital.
He got away with murder. Leonard Smith got away with murder. He did it legally through the system as it existed, but that's the bottom line.
That's the bottom line. He got away with murder.
Oh. Jury said no.
The public outcry to this led to a change in Indiana law, closing what many people saw as a loophole. Less than 2 years after Bostock's death, the law was changed where those who were insane would be declared guilty but mentally ill instead of not guilty by reason of insanity. If Leonard Smith was tried under this new law, after his 6 months in the hospital, he would have been sent to prison to serve out his sentence for killing Bostock. But Leonard Smith was tried under the previous law, and after getting out of the hospital, he spent the rest of his days out of the public eye, living in the same house where he was arrested. He would never get in trouble with the law again, but whether he felt any regret over killing Bostock is a mystery to all but Smith himself. He died in 2010 of natural causes at the age of 64. I have a confession to make. Before I started this project, I didn't know the story of Lyman Bostock. While researching contracts from the 1970s for another video, I stumbled on his and wondered, how have I never heard of this player? He signed one of the biggest contracts in early free agent history. And as I dug into it, I shortly found out why. I thought maybe it was a unique gap in my baseball history knowledge, but as I talked to other baseball fans, I found almost all had also not heard of Lyman Bostock. It seemed to be a story that had faded with time. I knew this was a video I had to make, but an unfortunate aspect of being just a YouTuber is I never knew Lyman Bostock as a person. I never talked to anyone that knew him either. And honestly, I feel a bit guilty giving it just the facts play-by-play of a small portion of Lyman's life, and not able to tell you what he was like as a person. To rectify this, I'm going to close out this video with some people that did know him personally, talking about Lyman in their own words.
I still think about him a lot, because he's such a great guy, and he was such a great guy in the clubhouse. And him and really Joe Rudy were really the two guys that paid attention to me at all my rookie year, on that team. So I still miss him tremendously, the things that we used to talk about, and just what a great player he was. He's, I thought, an underrated outfielder as well as such a great hitter.
I just feel like I've been robbed.
What were you robbed of, Vincent?
Friendship, love, a brother, just special relationship, you know. I just think he had so much more to give to the world, you know. I think he probably would have ended up being in the Hall of Fame.
Well, I think a lot of young players need to know the story, need to know that here was a kid who lost his dream at an early age and that worked his way up to getting to the major leagues and going out and having some success, and then eventually was shot and killed. The game was more interested to him than making money. And it's hard to find kids like that.
You ever meet somebody just click with you? Say, hey man, this guy's for real. You know, no airs about him. You don't meet those type of people that often. And I'm not just saying this because of this little thing you're doing here. It's the truth. When we get together, guys that I still hang around with, that I play ball with, that went to Valley State, sooner or later, the subject of Lyman Bostock will come up. And to a person, they'll say, man, that brother was something else. He was a real deal. At least he has that legacy. I don't know where you go after you leave here, but wherever it is, I hope he can look back down and can see all the goodwill and love we still have for the brother.
We have been deprived of a great player, a great friend. And an unmatched spirit has left the Angel Clubhouse.
He was very charismatic, and you did not notice him. But he wasn't like caught up in like his looks or anything. He was just very authentic and real. And I know it sounds corny, but it was almost like it was in slow motion, the connection. Very kind of eerie in a sense. I think we were supposed to like meet or something. That's been what, 44 years? Oh my God. 44 years. Yeah, it's been a real journey. Because there was so much promise. You know, there was so much brilliance. There was so much giving. I think of all the people who could have been touched and had their lives changed by him that never had that opportunity.
How do you reconcile that?
You can't. I put it in a little box up on the top of my closet. Yeah, it's hard. You just have to kind of look at it. I've given myself permission to look at it and every now and then and go, you know, it's okay. You know, I have to allow myself to be able to look at it, but not be stuck in it.
What's in the box?
Bright futures. Yeah. You open it and all these little stars and lights come out.